The morning sun crept through the tall windows of Blackwood Manor, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Rose adjusted the worn scarf covering her hair and took a deep breath before knocking on the massive oak door. This was her first day as a cleaning lady at the estate, and her stomach twisted with nerves. At 45, with lines etched around her eyes from years of hard work, Rose had cleaned many houses, but never one belonging to people like the Harringtons. The door swung open, revealing a stern-faced woman in a crisp black uniform. Her gray hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. "You must be the new help," the woman said, looking Rose up and down. "I'm Mrs. Walsh, the head housekeeper. You're late." Rose clutched her bag tighter. "I'm sorry, the bus was—" "Excuses won't be tolerated here," Mrs. Walsh cut in. "The Harringtons expect perfection. Follow me." Rose stepped into the entrance hall, momentarily stunned by its grandeur. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, throwing rainbow prisms across white walls adorned with paintings in gilded frames. The floor beneath her worn shoes was polished to such a shine she could almost see her reflection. "Close your mouth, girl, it's just a house," Mrs. Walsh said without turning around. "Though I suppose it's grander than what you're used to." Rose swallowed her pride and followed silently. She needed this job. The rent on her tiny apartment had gone up again, and her youngest still needed money for college books. Mrs. Walsh led her through a maze of corridors, rattling off rules and expectations without pausing for questions. Breakfast at 5 for staff. Lunch at 11, never in view of the family. Dinner after the family has retired. No personal calls during work hours. No fraternizing with the family. No entering rooms when family members are present unless specifically requested. They passed a room where a gardener was arranging fresh flowers in a vase. He gave Rose a small, sympathetic smile when Mrs. Walsh wasn't looking. "The Harringtons are old money," Mrs. Walsh continued. "They have certain standards. Lord Harrington is rarely home due to his business trips. Lady Harrington oversees the household and has particular preferences about everything. Their daughter—" She paused, her expression softening slightly before hardening again. "Well, you'll see soon enough." The tour continued through the kitchen where 3 cooks were preparing what looked like enough food for a small army, then past servants' quarters tucked away in the east wing. Rose tried to memorize the layout, but each corridor looked the same as the last. "This wing is primarily Miss Harrington's domain," Mrs. Walsh explained as they entered a sunlit hallway with pale blue walls. "She's the only child. 22 years old now." Rose nodded, wondering what kind of young woman grew up in such luxury. They turned into a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. The morning light poured in, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. The room was elegantly furnished with antique sofas and delicate tables. But what caught Rose's eye was the grand piano placed near the windows. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Black and glossy, with ivory keys that seemed to glow in the sunlight. But despite its magnificence, Rose noticed a fine layer of dust covering its surface. "The music room," Mrs. Walsh said, her voice oddly quiet. "You'll clean it every Wednesday. Pay special attention to the piano but never ever play it." Rose tore her gaze away from the instrument. "Does Miss Harrington play?" A shadow passed over Mrs. Walsh's face. "She used to. Quite brilliantly, in fact. She was something of a prodigy from a young age. Started when she was 4, performing by 7. Her mother had dreams of concert halls and international fame." "And now?" Rose asked, intrigued despite herself. Mrs. Walsh's lips pressed into a thin line. "She hasn't touched it in nearly 2 years, not since the incident." "What incident?" "That's not your concern," Mrs. Walsh snapped, her momentary openness vanishing. "Just remember, dust the piano carefully but do not touch the keys. Lady Harrington insists it be maintained as if it were still in use." Rose nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the piano. There was something sad about the beautiful instrument sitting unused, like a bird with clipped wings. "Your cleaning supplies are in this closet," Mrs. Walsh said, opening a door to reveal shelves of products and tools. "You'll be responsible for the East Wing." which includes Miss Harrington's bedroom, her private sitting room, this music room, the adjoining library, and the small dining room. Miss Harrington usually takes her breakfast in the garden when weather permits, so you'll have the morning to clean these rooms without disturbance. Rose tried to imagine the young woman who lived in these spaces. Was she spoiled and demanding, as rich girls were often portrayed in movies? Or perhaps sad and lonely in this enormous house? "What is she like?" Rose asked before she could stop herself. "Miss Harrington, I mean." Mrs. Walsh gave her a sharp look. "Your job is to clean, not to gossip about the family." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Miss Harrington is a private young lady who values her solitude," Mrs. Walsh said after a moment, her tone slightly less harsh. "She's well-educated, speaks 4 languages, and has a fondness for classical literature. Beyond that, it's not your place to know more." They continued the tour, but Rose's thoughts kept returning to the dusty piano and its owner who no longer played. What could make someone abandon such a beautiful gift? After showing Rose the laundry facilities and explaining the weekly cleaning schedule, Mrs. Walsh handed her a gray uniform similar to her own. "Change into this and begin with the library. Miss Harrington rarely uses it before noon. Remember, if you hear someone coming, make yourself scarce. The family doesn't like to see the staff working." Rose changed quickly in the small staff bathroom, the stiff fabric of the uniform scratching against her skin. She gathered her cleaning supplies and made her way back to the east wing, trying to recall the route through the labyrinthine corridors. The library was just as impressive as the rest of the house, with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling and a rolling ladder to reach the highest volumes. Rose worked methodically, dusting each shelf carefully, making sure not to disturb the precise arrangement of leather-bound books. As she cleaned, she found herself wondering about the mysterious Miss Harrington again. The books gave some clues, well-worn, copies of Russian novels, poetry collections, and surprisingly some modern fiction hidden behind the classics. Rose smiled at this small rebellion. After finishing the library, she moved to the small dining room. As she polished the mahogany table, she heard music drifting from somewhere in the house, a mournful violin piece that seemed to echo the emptiness of these grand rooms. By midday, Rose's back ached from bending and reaching, but she felt satisfied with her work. Only the music room remained. She saved it for last, drawn to the mysterious piano and the story behind it. The room was warmer now, the sunlight having moved across the sky to bathe the piano in golden light. Rose approached it reverently, running her duster gently over its curved edges. Despite Mrs. Walsh's warning, she felt an urge to press just one key, to hear what such a magnificent instrument would sound like. She resisted, remembering her need for this job. Instead, she cleaned carefully around each pedal, wiped down the music stand, and polished the glossy surface until she could see her reflection. As she worked, Rose noticed a photograph in a silver frame, partially hidden behind a vase of fresh flowers. Curious, she picked it up. It showed a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, sitting at this very piano. The girl's face was alight with joy as her fingers hovered over the keys, her long dark hair falling around her shoulders. Behind her stood a woman who could only be her mother, elegant and poised, one hand resting on the girl's shoulder. The woman was smiling, but her eyes held something else, something that looked like hunger. "What are you doing?" Rose nearly dropped the photograph. She turned to find a young woman standing in the doorway, watching her with cool, assessing eyes. She was tall and slender, with the same dark hair as the girl in the photo, though now it was cut short in a severe style that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. She wore a simple but obviously expensive white blouse and tailored trousers. "I'm sorry, miss," Rose stammered, quickly returning the photograph to its place. "I was just cleaning." "You're new," the young woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, miss. Today is my first day. I'm Rose. And you were looking at my photograph." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I apologize. I shouldn't have. It was taken the day before my first performance with the London Philharmonic," the young woman said, stepping into the room. Her voice was soft but clear, like the high notes of a piano. "I was 13. This, then, was Miss Harrington. She moved with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her posture. Rose couldn't help noticing how young she looked up, close, hardly more than a girl, really, despite her sophisticated appearance. You were very talented, Rose said. A flicker of something, pain, anger, crossed Miss Harrington's face. Yes, she said. I was. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Rose wondered if she should leave, but Miss Harrington hadn't dismissed her. Do you play? Miss Harrington asked suddenly. Rose laughed, then immediately regretted it when she saw the serious expression on the young woman's face. No, miss, well, not really. I learned a few hymns at church when I was young, but that was a lifetime ago. Miss Harrington nodded, her gaze drifting to the piano. For a moment, Rose thought she might approach it, might run her fingers over the keys Rose had so carefully dusted, but she remained where she was, as if an invisible barrier separated her from the instrument. You've done a good job cleaning it, she said finally. Most of the staff avoid this room altogether. It's a beautiful piano, Rose said honestly. It seems a shame for it to just sit here. As soon as the words left her mouth, Rose knew she had overstepped. Miss Harrington's expression closed like a door slamming shut. You should finish your work, she said coolly. My mother will be home soon, and she doesn't like to see the cleaning staff after lunch. With that, she turned and left, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Rose let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something told her that this brief encounter was significant, though she couldn't say why. She gathered her cleaning supplies, taking one last look at the gleaming piano before leaving the room. As she walked back to the servants' quarters, she wondered what had happened to make a young woman abandon something she clearly loved. What was the incident Mrs. Walsh had mentioned? And why keep the piano so meticulously maintained if no one ever played it? Rose had a feeling that life at Blackwood Manor would be more complicated than she had anticipated. But as she changed out of her uniform at the end of her shift, she found herself looking forward to returning tomorrow, and especially to next Wednesday, when she would clean the music room again. Perhaps by then, she might learn more about the mysterious Miss Harrington and her silent piano. 3 weeks had passed since Rose began working at Blackwood Manor. She had settled into the rhythm of the grand house, learning its peculiarities, which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck in humid weather, which rooms the family rarely used. She had also learned to navigate the complex social hierarchy among the staff. Mrs. Walsh remained stern but had softened slightly toward Rose after seeing her thorough work. The gardener Thomas had become a friendly face, sometimes sharing vegetables from the kitchen garden with her to take home, but it was Wednesday again, piano day, and Rose found herself looking forward to cleaning the music room with an anticipation that surprised her. She hadn't seen Miss Harrington since their brief encounter on her first day. The young woman kept to herself, often staying in her bedroom until late morning and taking meals alone. Rose had glimpsed her occasionally from a distance, walking in the garden with a book, or slipping into the library just as Rose finished cleaning it. Today, Rose saved the music room for last as she had the previous 2 Wednesdays. She entered quietly, half hoping to find Miss Harrington there, but the room was empty except for the dust motes dancing in the beams of afternoon sunlight. The piano waited, majestic and silent. Rose set down her cleaning supplies and moved toward it, admiring how the polished wood gleamed even under its thin layer of dust. She ran her cloth gently over the surface, working carefully around the ornate details. As she cleaned, Rose thought about her daughter's latest letter. Lily was doing well in college, thriving in her nursing program, but money was tight. The extra income from this job helped, but Rose worried it wouldn't be enough for next semester's books. She was so lost in thought that her hand slipped, brushing against the keys of the piano. A soft, melancholy chord filled the room. Rose froze, her heart pounding. The sound hung in the air, fading slowly like a sigh. She looked around frantically, terrified that someone had heard, that Mrs. Walsh would appear at any moment to fire her on the spot. But what happened instead was worse. You played it. The quiet voice came from the doorway. Miss Harrington stood there wearing a simple blue dress that made her look younger than before. Her expression wasn't angry, as Rose had feared, but something more complicated. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. I'm so sorry, miss, Rose said quickly, stepping away from the piano. It was an accident. My hand slipped while I was dusting. Miss Harrington entered the room slowly, her eyes fixed on the piano as if it might vanish if she looked away. That was an A minor 7th chord, she said softly. It's often used to convey melancholy or longing in music. Rose didn't know how to respond. She clutched her dustcloth tightly, waiting to be dismissed. Instead, Miss Harrington moved closer to the piano, her fingers hovering just above the keys without touching them. I haven't heard it make a sound in 1 year, 10 months, and 14 days. The specificity of the time frame struck Rose. You've been counting the days? Miss Harrington's eyes flicked up to meet hers. For a moment, Rose thought she had overstepped again. But then the young woman's expression softened. I suppose I have, yes. Rose noticed dark circles under Miss Harrington's eyes as if she hadn't been sleeping well. Up close, she looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that might crack at the slightest pressure. You said you played hymns once, Miss Harrington said suddenly. At church? Rose nodded, surprised she remembered. Nothing fancy. Just simple songs for Sunday service. Our church couldn't afford a proper pianist. Would you? Miss Harrington hesitated, seeming to struggle with the request. Would you play something now? Rose's eyes widened. Miss, I couldn't. Mrs. Walsh specifically said, Mrs. Walsh answers to my mother, who answers to me. Miss Harrington interrupted. I'm asking you to play. Put that way, it was hard to refuse. Still, Rose hesitated. It's been years, miss, and I never played anything complicated. Please, Miss Harrington said, and the word sounded unused, as if she rarely needed to ask for anything. Just one song. Rose set down her cleaning cloth and wiped her hands on her uniform. Slowly, she moved to the piano bench and sat down. The smooth ivory keys felt cool beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath and began to play the only song she still remembered completely, a simple hymn her grandmother had taught her. The notes came out hesitantly at first, some slightly off-key as her stiff fingers remembered their work. But as she continued, the melody flowed more smoothly. It was a gentle, hopeful tune, nothing like the complex classical pieces this piano was accustomed to playing, but it filled the room with warmth. When she finished, Rose kept her eyes on the keys, too nervous to look up. The silence that followed felt heavy. That was Amazing Grace, Miss Harrington said finally. My father's mother used to hum it while she knitted. Rose nodded, relieved that the young woman wasn't upset by her amateur playing. My grandmother taught it to me. She said it was a song about second chances. Miss Harrington moved closer until she was standing just beside the piano bench. You play with feeling, she said. Not with perfect technique, but with heart. That's something my teachers always said couldn't be taught. Rose felt herself blush at the unexpected compliment. Thank you, miss. My name is Vivian, Miss Harrington said suddenly. When we're alone, I'd prefer if you called me that. Rose was startled by this breach of protocol. I don't think that would be proper, miss. A ghost of a smile touched Vivian's lips. Nothing about this situation is proper. She gestured toward the piano. May I? Rose quickly stood up, making room on the bench. Vivian sat down, her posture automatically adjusting to the correct form. For a long moment, she just stared at the keys, her hands resting in her lap. I'm not sure I remember how, she whispered, so quietly that Rose almost didn't hear. I don't believe that, Rose said gently. Some things become part of you. Like riding a bicycle or swimming. Your body remembers even when your mind is afraid. Vivian looked up at her, surprise clear in her eyes. Then slowly, she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The first chord she played was tentative, barely audible, but the second was stronger, and by the third, her fingers were moving with growing confidence. Rose watched in awe as Vivian began to play a piece she didn't recognize, something complex and emotional that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. The young woman's face transformed as she played, the tension melting away, replaced by an expression of deep concentration and, gradually, joy. The piece built in intensity, Vivian's fingers flying across the keys with remarkable speed and precision. Rose could hardly believe this was the same person who moments ago had claimed not to remember how to play. This was talent in its purest form, raw, natural, and beautiful. When the piece ended, the final notes lingering in the air, Vivian's hands remained poised above the keys. Then slowly they began to tremble. She lowered them to her lap and took a shaky breath. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, she said, her voice unsteady. It was the last piece I performed in public. Rose wanted to ask what had happened, why she had stopped playing, but she sensed the moment was too fragile for such questions. Instead, she said, It was beautiful. Vivian stood abruptly. I shouldn't have done that. Why not? You play wonderfully. You don't understand. Vivian's voice hardened. There are expectations, consequences, things you know nothing about. The sudden shift in mood left Rose confused. "I'm sorry, miss, I didn't mean to upset you." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "No, I'm sorry. It's not your fault." She glanced at the piano, then back at Rose. "Please don't tell anyone about this, especially not my mother." Before Rose could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Vivian moved quickly away from the piano and Rose grabbed her cleaning cloth, pretending to dust a nearby table. Mrs. Walsh appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "Miss Harrington, I didn't realize you were here." "Rose, you should have informed me that Miss Harrington was using the room." "It's fine, Mrs. Walsh," Vivian said coolly, her voice once again taking on the detached tone Rose had heard on her first day. "The cleaning lady wasn't disturbing me. I was just passing through." Mrs. Walsh nodded, though she looked suspicious. "Your mother has returned from her charity luncheon and is asking for you." Vivian's shoulders tensed visibly. "Tell her I'll be there shortly." After Mrs. Walsh left, Vivian turned to Rose. "Same time next Wednesday," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Miss, I don't think—" "Please." There was that word again. Still awkward on her lips, but clearly sincere. "I haven't felt—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I haven't felt anything in a long time." The music helped. How could Rose refuse? Despite her better judgment, she nodded. "Same time next Wednesday." A small, genuine smile transformed Vivian's face, making her look her age for the first time. Then she composed herself and left the room, her posture once again perfect, her expression carefully blank. Rose finished cleaning in a daze, her mind replaying the sound of Vivian's playing. There had been such passion in it, such life. How could someone with that gift inside them bear to keep it locked away? As she gathered her supplies to leave, Rose noticed something on the floor near the piano, a small folded piece of paper. She picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Young Prodigy Collapses During Crucial Performance." Below was a photo of a younger Vivian being helped off stage, her face twisted in what looked like pain or terror. Rose quickly refolded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. She would return it next Wednesday. And perhaps then, she might learn the rest of Vivian Harrington's story and understand why a young woman with such extraordinary talent would choose silence over music. As she left Blackwood Manor that evening, the melodies she had heard kept playing in her head. Something had changed today, some connection had formed. Rose wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in years she felt a spark of excitement about what the future might hold. The days until the next Wednesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rose found herself distracted during her cleaning duties, her mind returning again and again to the newspaper clipping hidden in her dresser drawer at home. She had read it several times, trying to understand what had happened to Vivian. The article was brief, offering few details beyond stating that 19-year-old piano prodigy Vivian Harrington had collapsed during her debut with the National Symphony Orchestra. It mentioned undisclosed health concerns and quoted Lady Harrington saying her daughter would take a necessary hiatus from performing. There was nothing about why she had collapsed or why. Almost 2 years later, she still wasn't playing. When Wednesday finally arrived, Rose arrived at Blackwood Manor earlier than usual, her heart beating a little faster as she worked through her morning cleaning routine. She kept the music room for last as always, but found herself rushing through the other rooms. At exactly 2 o'clock, she entered the music room, half expecting to find Vivian already there. But the room was empty. Rose began her usual cleaning routine, frequently glancing at the door. By the time she reached the piano, she had begun to wonder if Vivian had changed her mind. She pulled out the newspaper clipping from her pocket and placed it on top of the piano, then started dusting the instrument carefully. As her hand moved across the polished surface, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Tiny scratch marks near the right edge, as if someone had dug their fingernails into the wood in a moment of intense emotion. "You found it." Rose turned to see Vivian standing in the doorway. Today she wore a simple gray dress that matched the stormy look in her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the newspaper clipping. "It was on the floor last week," Rose explained. "I was going to return it to you." Vivian entered the room and picked up the yellowed paper, her fingers tracing the headline. "My mother keeps a whole file of these. Articles about my promising career and then my tragic setback." She reads them sometimes when she thinks no one is watching. She set the clipping down and looked at Rose with surprising directness.
Did you read it?
Rose nodded, not wanting to lie. Yes, I'm sorry if that was wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't tell the whole story anyway. Vivian moved to the piano bench and sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys without touching them. No one knows the whole story except me. Rose remained silent, sensing that Vivian wanted to talk but needed to find her own way to the words. I played my first recital when I was 5, Vivian said finally. My mother had me practicing 4 hours a day by the time I was 7. 6 hours by 10. 8 hours by 12. She laughed, a hollow sound without humor. I didn't go to school like normal children. I had tutors who worked around my practice schedule. I didn't have friends, there wasn't time. Rose thought about her own daughter, Lily, and how she had insisted on letting her have a normal childhood despite their financial struggles. The idea of a child spending 8 hours a day at a piano seemed cruel. Didn't you ever want to do something else? She asked. Vivian looked up, surprised by the question. I never thought about it. The piano was my life, my identity. Her fingers finally touched the keys, playing a soft, melancholy sequence of notes, and I loved it truly. When I played, I felt complete, like I was speaking a language only I understood. Rose nodded, thinking of the way Vivian had transformed when playing the previous week. Then why did you stop? Vivian's hand stilled. For a moment, Rose thought she had pushed too far, that Vivian would shut down or ask her to leave, but instead the young woman took a deep breath and began to speak. It was the biggest performance of my life, my debut with the National Symphony. Mother had spent months arranging it, calling in favors, making sure all the right critics would be there. Her voice was flat, as if she were reciting something memorized rather than reliving a memory. I'd been preparing Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1 for almost a year. I knew every note, every dynamic marking, every place where my fingers needed to stretch or my wrists needed to relax. She paused, her eyes focusing on something Rose couldn't see. The day of the performance, I couldn't keep any food down. Mother said it was just nerves. The doctor gave me something to calm me, but it made my head fuzzy. I told Mother I didn't feel right, but she said I had to perform. Too much was riding on it, her reputation, my future, invitations to other prestigious venues. Rose felt a knot forming in her stomach, sensing where the story was heading. I made it through the first movement, Vivian continued, but during the second, my hands started to shake. Then they cramped up completely like claws. I couldn't straighten my fingers. Her own hands curled involuntarily at the memory. The pain was indescribable. I tried to keep playing, but the wrong notes kept coming. The orchestra got confused. The conductor stopped, and then you collapsed, Rose finished softly. Vivian nodded. They carried me off stage. The audience was whispering. Some were laughing. Mother was furious, not concerned furious. She kept saying I had ruined everything. That's terrible, Rose said, unable to hide her disapproval. You were ill. The doctors called it focal dystonia, a neurological condition that affects specific muscles, often in the hands. It's common among musicians who practice excessively. Vivian flexed her fingers. They said with rest and therapy I might recover. Might. And have you? Recovered? Rose asked. Vivian's eyes met hers. Physically, mostly. The specialists Mother hired were very good. But every time I think about performing again, my hands start to shake. And Mother? What about her? She can't accept that I might never perform professionally again. She keeps saying we just need to find the right doctor, the right therapy. She has this idea that I'll make a triumphant comeback and all will be forgiven. Vivian shook her head. But I don't want to go back to that life. The pressure, the expectations, practicing until my fingers bled. Then what do you want? Rose asked gently. Vivian looked startled, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. I don't know, she admitted. That's the problem. Music has been my whole life. Without it, I don't know who I am. But you don't have to give up music completely, Rose pointed out. You could play just for yourself. For joy, not for performance. Mother would never understand that. She'd see it as a waste of my gift. The bitterness in Vivian's voice was palpable. Rose hesitated, then sat down on the piano bench beside Vivian, close but not touching. Can I tell you something about mothers and daughters? Vivian nodded, curious. We don't always understand each other, Rose said simply. My daughter Lily is studying to be a nurse. I wanted her to find a nice boy and settle down, have a family. I didn't understand why she wanted to work such long hours in a difficult job. But it was her choice to make, not mine. And now? Now I'm proud of her, Rose said, smiling at the thought of her daughter. She's following her own path, even if it's not the one I would have chosen. Vivian considered this. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother who can accept that. Lady Harrington might surprise you, Rose suggested, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. Vivian shook her head. You don't know her. Music isn't just something I do, it's how our family maintains its position in society. My performances were social events. Mother's friends would boast about attending. Critics wrote about her elegant hosting as much as my playing. Rose wanted to argue but sensed it wouldn't help. Instead, she changed tack. Play something, she said. Not for an audience, not for your mother. Just for yourself. Vivian hesitated, then placed her hands on the keys again. This time she didn't play the complex emotional piece from the previous week. Instead, she began a simple, gentle melody that Rose recognized as a popular song from the radio. I used to play this in secret, Vivian confessed, continuing to play. Mother thought popular music was beneath me. But I liked the way it made me feel. Light, happy. Not like I was carrying the weight of centuries of musical tradition. As she played, Rose noticed that Vivian's technique was still flawless. But there was a freedom in her movements that hadn't been there before. Her shoulders were relaxed, her expression peaceful. You should see your face when you play, Rose said softly. It's like you become a different person. Vivian's fingers slowed but didn't stop. When I was little, before the competitions and the pressure, playing made me happy. I'd make up songs about my dolls or the garden. Mother would get upset, said I was wasting practice time on frivolous things. That doesn't sound frivolous to me, Rose said. It sounds like creativity. The music shifted, becoming something Rose didn't recognize, something simpler but beautiful in its simplicity. I just made that up, Vivian said, a note of wonder in her voice. I haven't improvised since I was a child. Rose smiled, seeing the joy in Vivian's eyes. See, the music is still in you. It's just been waiting for you to find it again. For a few minutes, they sat together in comfortable silence as Vivian continued to play, moving from one melody to another, sometimes recognizable songs, sometimes her own creations. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Vivian's hands froze on the keys, her body tensing. Vivian, are you in there? The voice was cultured, commanding, Lady Harrington. Vivian shot Rose a panicked look. Quick, take your cleaning things and go to the corner, she whispered. Pretend you've just finished. Rose grabbed her supplies and moved away from the piano just as Lady Harrington appeared in the doorway. She was a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair and the same delicate features as her daughter, though hers were arranged in a perpetual expression of mild disapproval. There you are, darling. I thought I heard. Her gaze landed on the piano, then shifted to Rose, narrowing slightly. What's going on here? Nothing, Mother, Vivian said, standing up from the piano bench. I was just checking that the cleaning was being done properly. Father's birthday dinner is next week, and you know how he likes to have guests admire the piano, even if no one plays it anymore. The pointed comment made Lady Harrington's lips tighten. Yes, well, she turned her attention to Rose. You may go. The East Wing sitting room needs attention before tomorrow's tea. Yes, my lady, Rose said, gathering her cleaning supplies and heading for the door. As she passed Vivian, their eyes met briefly. Rose gave her a small, encouraging smile. In that moment, Rose knew she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just a cleaning lady, and Vivian was no longer just the aristocratic young woman she worked for. Something had changed between them. A connection had formed, fragile but real. As Rose left the room, she heard Lady Harrington ask, "Was that woman bothering you?" "No, Mother," Vivian replied, her voice steady. "Actually, she's been quite helpful." Rose smiled to herself as she walked down the hallway. Perhaps there was hope for Vivian after all. And perhaps in helping the young woman rediscover her love of music, Rose might find something she hadn't realized she was missing, a purpose beyond just making ends meet. Word spread quickly among the staff at Blackwood Manor. By the end of the week, everyone from the kitchen maids to the groundskeepers had heard some version of what had happened in the music room. Stories varied. Some said Rose had been caught playing the piano. Others claimed Vivian had been giving her lessons. Mrs. Walsh tried to squash the rumors, but they persisted, fueled by the staff's endless fascination with the family they served. Rose noticed the sidelong glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room. No one confronted her directly, but she could feel the shift in how the other staff treated her, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, as if she had broken some unspoken rule. Only Thomas, the gardener, remained the same, greeting her with his usual friendly smile when she arrived Monday morning. "Quite the stir you've caused," he said, as he handed her a small bunch of fresh herbs from the kitchen garden. "Mint for your tea," he explained. "Helps with stress." "Thanks," Rose said, tucking the fragrant leaves into her pocket. "Is it really that bad?" Thomas shrugged his broad shoulders. "People talk. It's what happens in big houses like this, not much else to do." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, I think it's good someone's finally got her playing again. That piano's been silent too long." Rose started to deny it, but Thomas waved her off. "Don't worry, I won't say anything. Just be careful. Lady Harrington doesn't like when things happen that she didn't arrange herself." His warning stayed with Rose as she went about her duties that day. She didn't see Vivian at all, though she found herself looking for her in the hallways and gardens. By Tuesday, Rose had begun to worry that Lady Harrington had forbidden her daughter from any further contact with the cleaning staff. Wednesday arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle that matched Rose's mood. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, preparing herself for disappointment when she reached the music room. To her surprise, she found a note tucked under the door when she arrived, a small folded piece of cream-colored paper with her name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a simple message: "Mother is attending a charity luncheon from 1 to 4. We'll meet you at the usual time." Relief washed over Rose. She tucked the note into her pocket and began cleaning the room with renewed energy. At exactly 2 o'clock, she heard footsteps in the hallway and turned to see Vivian entering, a leather-bound book tucked under her arm. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Rose admitted. "Mother's been watching me closely," Vivian said, closing the door behind her. "But I needed to see you." She hesitated, then added, "To play, I mean." "I needed to play." Rose nodded, understanding the correction wasn't meant to hurt her. "Has your mother said anything about last week?" "Not directly. She's too skilled for that." Vivian set the book down on a small table. "She's arranged for a new doctor to come next month, another specialist who supposedly has a revolutionary treatment for dystonia. And what do you think about that?" Vivian sighed. "I think she's still not listening, but that's nothing new." She moved to the piano and sat down, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "I've been thinking about what you said, about playing for myself, not for an audience. Have you tried?" "When you're alone?" "A little. It's strange, when no one's listening, I feel both freer and more afraid. Like I might discover something about myself I'm not ready to face." Rose understood that feeling all too well. After her husband left, she had avoided looking too deeply at her own wants and needs, focusing instead on survival, on making sure Lily had what she needed. "It was easier that way, less painful. What's the book?" she asked, gesturing to the leather volume Vivian had brought. "Something I found in the library. It belonged to my grandmother." Vivian reached for it and opened it carefully. It's her collection of folk songs in simple pieces. She used to play them for me when I was very young, before Mother decided I needed proper training. She placed the book on the piano's music stand and turned to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "This was my favorite. Grandmother said it was a love song from her homeland." Vivian began to play, and the melody that filled the room was unlike anything Rose had heard her play before, simpler, but somehow more profound. It spoke of longing and hope and quiet joy, emotions that needed no technical flourishes to express. When she finished, Rose noticed tears in Vivian's eyes. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Yes," Vivian agreed, "and I'd forgotten it completely. Isn't that strange? Something I once loved so much, just gone from my memory." "Not gone," Rose corrected, "just waiting to be found again." Vivian smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "You're very wise, Rose." "Not wise, just old enough to have learned a few things." "Will you tell me about yourself?" Vivian asked, surprising Rose with the directness of the question. All these weeks I've talked about my problems, but I know almost nothing about you. Rose hesitated. What could her ordinary life possibly offer someone like Vivian? But the young woman's interest seemed genuine. So she began to talk about growing up in a small village, about marrying young and moving to the city, about her husband leaving when Lily was 12, about the years of working multiple jobs to make ends meet. And now Lily's in college, she concluded, studying to be a nurse. First one in our family to go to university. You must be very proud of her, Vivian said. I am, though I miss her terribly. She only comes home during holidays now, too busy with her studies. It sounds like you gave her something precious, Vivian observed, the freedom to choose her own path. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rose wondered if Vivian was thinking about her own mother, about the path that had been chosen for her. It wasn't always easy, Rose admitted. There were times I thought I was making all the wrong choices. Times I could barely keep food on the table, but somehow we got through. Because you're strong, Vivian said. Stronger than you realize. Before Rose could respond, they heard voices in the hallway, one of them unmistakably Lady Harrington's. She had returned early. Quick, Vivian whispered, moving away from the piano. Pretend you're dusting the bookshelves. Rose grabbed her cleaning cloth and moved to the far side of the room just as the door opened. Lady Harrington entered, accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. And this is the music room, Lady Harrington was saying. The piano is a Steinway concert grand over 100 years old. She stopped short when she saw Vivian. Darling, I didn't expect to find you here. I was just reading, Vivian said smoothly, gesturing to the book she had hastily closed and placed on a side table. Lady Harrington's gaze shifted to Rose, then back to her daughter. Something calculating flickered in her eyes. Dr. Reynolds was just telling me about his success with musicians suffering from performance anxiety. I thought you two might like to meet. The man stepped forward, hand extended. A pleasure, Miss Harrington. Your mother speaks very highly of your talent. Former talent, Vivian corrected, ignoring his outstretched hand. And I don't suffer from anxiety, Dr. Reynolds. I have focal dystonia, a neurological condition, which often has psychological components, he replied smoothly. The mind-body connection is powerful, especially in artists. Rose watched Vivian's face harden, saw the walls going up behind her eyes. She wanted to say something, to defend her, but knew her place too well to speak. If you'll excuse me, Vivian said coldly, I have a headache. Perhaps we can continue this conversation another time. She left the room without waiting for a response. Her footsteps quick and sharp on the hardwood floor. Dr. Reynolds looked at Lady Harrington with raised eyebrows. She's always been stubborn, Lady Harrington said with a tight smile, ever since she was a child. But she'll come around. She turned to Rose, her expression hardening. You may finish up here and then attend to the library. And in the future, when my daughter is in a room, please find somewhere else to clean. Yes, my lady, Rose said, keeping her eyes downcast. But inside she was seething. How could Lady Harrington not see what she was doing to her daughter? How could a mother be so blind? After they left, Rose finished her cleaning quickly, her mind racing. She needed to find Vivian to make sure she was all right, but she had no idea where to look. The manor was enormous, and Rose was restricted to certain areas. As she was gathering her supplies to leave, Thomas appeared in the doorway. Rose, he said urgently, I thought you should know Miss Harrington is in the garden house. She seems quite upset. Rose hesitated. Going to the garden house would mean crossing boundaries she shouldn't cross. If she were caught, she could lose her job. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. I'll keep watch, he offered. Lady Harrington and her guest are having tea in the front parlor. No one will see you if you go now. Rose made her decision quickly. Thank you, Thomas. She set down her cleaning supplies and followed him through the servants' corridor that led to the back of the house. The rain had stopped, but the garden was still wet, droplets clinging to the roses and foxgloves that lined the stone path. At the far end, partially hidden by an ancient oak tree, stood a small stone building, the garden house where the family sometimes took tea during fine weather. Rose approached cautiously, not wanting to startle Vivian. Through the window, she could see the young woman sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. She knocked gently on the door. Vivian looked up, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Rose, she quickly wiped her face. You shouldn't be here, she said, but she moved over on the bench, making room. Rose entered and closed the door behind her. Thomas told me where to find you. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Vivian said automatically, then sighed. No, that's a lie. I'm not fine. I'm angry and frustrated, and she trailed off, searching for the right word. Trapped? Rose suggested. Vivian looked at her with surprise. Yes, exactly, trapped. She gestured around her. Even this garden house, I used to come here to escape, but it's still on the estate. Still part of the cage. Rose sat down beside her. What do you want, Vivian? Not what your mother wants for you, but what you want for yourself. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. I want to play music again, she said finally. But on my terms. Not for audiences or critics or my mother's social circle, just for the joy of it. Then that's what you should do, Rose said simply. It's not that easy. Mother would never. This isn't about your mother, Rose interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. This is about you, your life, your choices. Vivian stared at her, clearly taken aback by Rose's directness. Then slowly she nodded. You're right, she took a deep breath. I need to stand up to her, to tell her that I'm done with doctors and treatments and talk of comebacks. Will she listen? Rose asked gently. Probably not. But I need to say it anyway. Vivian reached out and took Rose's hand. Thank you. For everything. For making me play again. For listening. For seeing me as a person, not just a prodigy or a disappointment. Rose squeezed her hand. That's what friends do. Friends, Vivian repeated, as if testing the word. I don't think I've ever had a real friend before. The realization broke Rose's heart. What kind of life had this young woman lived? Surrounded by wealth and privilege, but deprived of the most basic human connections. Well, you have one now, she said firmly. They sat together in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the birds singing after the rain. Then Vivian straightened her shoulders, a new determination in her eyes. I need to speak to Mother. Today. Before I lose my courage. Do you want me to come with you? Rose offered. Vivian shook her head. No, this is something I need to do myself. She stood up. But knowing you're here supporting me, that helps more than you know. As they walked back toward the house, Rose noticed the staff watching them from windows and doorways. Curious, disapproving, concerned. News of this would spread even faster than before. Mrs. Walsh would be furious. Lady Harrington might even fire her. But looking at Vivian's face, seeing the newfound resolve there, Rose knew it was worth the risk. Whatever happens, she said as they reached the back entrance, remember that the music is inside you. No one can take that away. Vivian nodded, then surprised Rose by hugging her quickly. I'll find you tomorrow, she promised, to tell you how it went. Rose watched her walk away, back straight and head held high. Whatever happened next would change things forever, for both of them. Rose didn't sleep well that night. She tossed and turned in her small bed, worrying about Vivian and what might have happened after their parting. Had she really confronted her mother? How had Lady Harrington responded? And what would it mean for Rose's position at Blackwood Manor? By morning, she had convinced herself she would be fired as soon as she arrived. She dressed with shaking hands, telling herself it didn't matter. She could find another job. Perhaps not one that paid as well, but she would manage. She always had. To her surprise, Mrs. Walsh greeted her with the usual brisk nod when she arrived, assigning her the regular cleaning schedule without comment. Rose moved through her morning duties in a fog of confusion and anticipation, jumping at every sound, expecting Lady Harrington to appear at any moment with her dismissal. By lunchtime, she couldn't stand the suspense any longer. She sought out Thomas in the kitchen garden, finding him tending to the tomato plants. Have you heard anything? She asked without preamble. About Miss Harrington? About me? Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. There was quite a row last night from what the kitchen staff say. Voices raised, doors slammed. Lord Harrington came home early from his business trip and got involved. He lowered his voice. Jenny, she's one of the kitchen maids, said she heard Lady Harrington crying in her room late last night. Rose felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't meant to cause pain to anyone, even Lady Harrington. And Vivian, Miss Harrington, I mean, locked herself in her room after dinner. Hasn't come out yet today. Thomas gave her a measured look. What exactly happened between you two, Rose? She hesitated, unsure how much to share. We became friends, she said finally. I know that sounds impossible with our different positions, but we did. I encouraged her to start playing the piano again. For herself, not for performance, Thomas nodded thoughtfully. And that's what led to the confrontation with her mother? I think so. Vivian, Miss Harrington, she's been living under so much pressure. Expected to be perfect. To perform. She needed to stand up for herself. Well, something's changed, that's for certain. Thomas plucked a ripe cherry tomato and handed it to her. Best get back to work before Mrs. Walsh comes looking for you. And Rose? He touched her arm lightly. Be careful. The walls have ears in this place. Rose returned to her duties, the small tomato a warm weight in her pocket. She saved the music room for last, as always, both hoping and fearing that Vivian would be there. But when she arrived, the room was empty, the piano closed and silent. With a heavy heart, she began her cleaning routine. Perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps their brief friendship had run its course, had served its purpose in helping Vivian find her voice. It wasn't as if they could have continued meeting like this indefinitely. Their worlds were too different. She was dusting the bookshelves when she heard the door open. Turning, she expected to see Mrs. Walsh or perhaps one of the other maids. Instead, Lord Harrington himself stood in the doorway. Rose had only glimpsed him a few times since she began working at the manor. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the same aristocratic features as his daughter. Though his eyes were warmer, less guarded. You must be Rose, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Yes, sir. She curtsied awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol for addressing the master of the house directly. I was just finishing up in here. Please don't let me interrupt. He entered the room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze lingered on the piano. My daughter speaks quite highly of you. Rose felt her cheeks warm. That's very kind of her, sir. Kind, perhaps, but also honest. He moved to one of the windows, looking out at the garden. Vivian tells me you've encouraged her to play again, that you've helped her rediscover her love of music. I just listened, sir, and perhaps shared a different perspective. Lord Harrington turned to face her. Sometimes that's all we need, someone who sees us clearly without expectations or demands. He sighed deeply. I've been away too much. Focused on business, on providing for my family materially, while neglecting what really matters. Rose remained silent, uncomfortable with this unexpected confidence. My wife and I had quite a lengthy discussion last night, he continued. About Vivian, about her future, about what truly makes her happy. He ran his hand along the piano's polished surface. I'm ashamed to admit how little I knew about my own daughter's struggles. How blind I've been to her unhappiness. She loves you both very much, Rose offered. She just needs to find her own path. Lord Harrington nodded. Yes, that's what she said. Her own path, he smiled slightly. You've made quite an impression on her, Rose. She was quite adamant that any changes to the household staff would result in her immediate departure from Blackwood Manor. Rose blinked in surprise. Sir, my wife suggested that perhaps your influence on Vivian was inappropriate given your respective positions. His expression softened, but Vivian made it clear that your friendship is important to her. And after the past few years of watching her withdraw from everyone and everything she once loved, I'm in no position to deny her something that has clearly brought her back to life. Relief washed over Rose. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, he said with a wry smile. Lady Harrington is still adjusting to the situation. It may take some time for her to fully accept the changes Vivian wants to make. Before Rose could respond, they heard quick footsteps in the hallway. Vivian appeared in the doorway slightly out of breath, her eyes finding Rose immediately. You're here, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was afraid. She stopped, noticing her father. Oh, you've already spoken to Rose? Just briefly, Lord Harrington said. I'll leave you two to talk. He kissed his daughter's cheek as he passed. Remember what we discussed, he said quietly. After he left, Vivian closed the door and turned to Rose with a smile brighter than any she had seen before. I did it, she said. I told them everything. How I felt about performing, about the pressure, about what I want for my future. And Rose, they listened. Well, Father did immediately. Mother took longer to come around. I heard there was quite an argument, Rose said cautiously. Vivian nodded. It wasn't easy. Mother said some hurtful things at first, about disappointment and wasted potential, about letting down the family name. She moved to the piano and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. But then Father arrived and he asked me something no one has ever asked before. What would make me happy? And what did you say? I said I wanted to teach. Vivian's eyes shone with excitement. Not perform, but teach music to children. To help them find joy in it, not pressure and fear. To make sure no child goes through what I did. Rose felt her own eyes filling with tears. That sounds wonderful. I'm going to start with children from the village school, Vivian continued.
Father has agreed to convert the garden house into a small music studio.
And eventually, I want to establish a scholarship program for talented children who can't afford lessons. Your mother agreed to all this? Vivian's smile dimmed slightly. She's coming to terms with it. Father helped her see that my happiness is more important than her social aspirations. It will take time, but I think she'll get there eventually. She sat down at the piano bench and patted the space beside her. There's something else I wanted to tell you. Something I've been working on. Rose joined her, their shoulders touching lightly. What is it? In answer, Vivian began to play. The piece started softly, tentatively, like the first raindrops before a summer shower. Then it built gradually, gaining confidence and strength, weaving together themes that reminded Rose of their conversations, of Vivian's journey from silence to self-expression. I composed it, Vivian said as her fingers continued to dance across the keys. I'm calling it The Cleaning Lady's Gift. Rose laughed through her tears. That's a terrible name. You're right, Vivian agreed, still playing. How about Friendship Across Boundaries? Too obvious. Much too obvious. Then I'll just call it Rose, Vivian decided. Simple and beautiful like its inspiration. The music swelled to a joyful crescendo, then gentled into a peaceful conclusion. As the final notes faded, Rose found herself without words, too moved to speak. There's one more thing, Vivian said, turning to face her. Father has agreed to pay for Lily's remaining college expenses. As a thank you for what you've done for me, Rose gasped. Vivian, no, that's too much. I can't accept. It's already done, Vivian said firmly. The letter went out this morning. Lily will never have to worry about tuition or books again. Rose covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. The constant weight of financial worry that had been her companion for so many years suddenly lifted, leaving her dizzy with relief. Why would you do this? She whispered. Vivian gently pulled Rose's hands away from her face. Because you taught me something invaluable. You showed me that music isn't about perfection or performance or pleasing others. It's about connection, expression, joy. She squeezed Rose's hands. You gave me back my voice. This is the least I can do in return. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. They turned to see Lady Harrington standing in the doorway, her expression carefully composed. I heard you playing, she said to Vivian. It was different from your usual style, but quite lovely. Thank you, Mother, Vivian said, her voice steady. I wrote it myself. Lady Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. Did you? How interesting. Her gaze shifted to Rose, and though there was no warmth in it, there was a certain respect that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Walsh mentioned you might be interested in taking on additional responsibilities. Specifically, helping to prepare the garden house for Vivian's teaching endeavor. It was an olive branch, however small. I would be honored, my lady, Rose said. Lady Harrington nodded once, then addressed her daughter. Your father and I will be dining at 8. He suggested you might join us to discuss the details of your plans. With that, she turned and left, her back straight, her dignity intact. That's progress, Vivian said with a small smile. A month ago, she wouldn't even have acknowledged the possibility of me teaching. Rose nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. What happens now? She asked. Now, Vivian said, placing her hands on the keys again. I practice. I compose. I prepare to teach. Her eyes met Rose's, full of newfound confidence. And every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, you and I meet here as friends. If that's all right with you. Rose thought about the strange, unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. How a simple act of cleaning a piano had changed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Yes, she said, smiling through happy tears. That's more than all right with me. Vivian began to play again, and this time Rose recognized the melody. Amazing Grace, the simple hymn she had played on that first day. But now Vivian added harmonies and embellishments, transforming it into something new yet familiar. complex yet accessible.